What's going on? Welcome to the second Elementalist I've made this league, and this time it's a Spark and Vaal Stormcall character. I mainly use Spark for clearing and then Stormcall for bosses and syndicate members. It works especially well against Shaper and his guardians, since they aren't divided into different phases, so you can more or less one-shot them with Vaal Righteous Fire and Vaal Stormcall, like you can see me doing against the Minotaur right here in the video. However, it doesn't work that well for Elder and his guardians, since they are divided into different phases, so in those fights you have to rely on Spark for the majority of the damage. I didn't use the Spark Threshold Jewel so that I could aim sparks in one direction, like you can see me doing here against the Phoenix. The way Spark works is you want to combine it with Pierce, and then keep the enemy close to a corner or a wall, so that the sparks bounce back and hit the enemy multiple times. I used a bow with +2 to suck the support gems, and then made sure to keep my Spark set up here, since I had to rely on that so heavily, and Stormcall already did enough damage on its own anyway. Really overpowered weapons are of course expensive to buy, but as long as you don't need cast on crit or power charge on crit, then it's really not that difficult to craft. I just made sure I got double damage and then multi-modded the weapon. With the help of the new crafting bench, it's really not that hard to make a very good weapon for basically any build you want. I failed the Stormcall on the last phase against Shaper, so I had to kill him using Spark. So the only issue is that you have to make sure you use the Vaal skills at the right time, and you should be able to insta-phase most bosses with that alone, especially with power charges maxed out. For Ascendancy I went for Shaper of Desolation and Beacon of Ruin for more boss damage against shocked enemies. This also helps with chilling and igniting enemies, so if you wanna use Hypothermia and then get Pierce corrupted on your quiver, then that's a nice way to add more signatory damage. For Helm I bought a blue one with reduced Stormcall duration enchanted on it, and then faucet crafted for some life and resistance. But really though, you want minus lightning resistance to nearby enemies on it as well if you can. Like I mentioned, I struggled a bit with bosses that I had to rely on Spark on, so that's probably why my Elder kill was a bit sloppy. I only used a level 19 Spark gem and some less than maxed out support gems though, so if you get those to level 20 or even level 21, then that will boost your Spark damage even further. For Pantheon I decided to go with Lunaris and Gruthkul for the damage reduction and avoid chance, and since I had plenty of evasion gear, then that works really well together as another defensive layer. I leveled with Spark right from the start, and then used a couple of Life Sprig wands until I switched them out for Axioms at level 10. I obviously used a Tabula and then kept my Stormcall gems in my backup weapon slot, since I didn't start using that until maps really, when I could equip the bow that I had ready in my stash. It's a fun build to play, and Spark is a really fun skill to play around with, even if it can be a bit awkward at times, but you definitely get used to that while playing around with it. The reason I went for a bow instead of something like a staff is so that I could use a quiver as well, and Seamus's quiver fits perfectly with a build like this, with its extra cast speed and lightning damage. For skills, this is the final tree I ended up with at level 90, but as always you can go down here and click on the different progression points to see the route I took while leveling. I leveled with Spark and picked up Elemental Overload early on to help my damage, and then didn't switch out of that until I had enough crit from both gear and from skill points. I picked up plenty of life and crit nodes, but also made sure to get the node up here that gives 4% increased spell damage per power charge. For jewels I used ones with lightning damage to spells, as well as a bit of life on them. And then for Ascendancy I picked up Shaper of Desolation and Beacon of Ruin, and then after that I went for Pendulum of Destruction and Mastermind of Discord. Other options for Ascendancy could be running as an Inquisitor or maybe even an Assassin. For my gear I used a bow with double damage and then multi-modded that bow with +2 to Sacred Support Gems, some lightning damage and some extra non-chaos as extra chaos damage. The way I got the white socket was by running a rank 3 Vorici in my safe house. For chest I used a lore weave for the crit chance and elemental damage, but mostly I did it for the increased maximum resistance. I used a Mark of the Shaper ring because it's just so much damage from that ring alone, and with the life on top of it as well. And to get the spell damage bonus I used an Elder ring in my other ring slot, and then made sure that ring had Warlord's Mark on hit on it, since I needed the life and mana leech from that. I mentioned before I bought a blue helm with the reduced Stormcall duration enchant on it, but really that's just overkill, and I just recommend going for minus lightning resistance to nearby enemies instead. For quiver I went for Seamus's gift for the increased cast speed, a bit of life and lightning resistance and some lightning damage. And then for the amulet I went for a crit multiplier, some lightning damage and some life, and then I crafted area effect and area damage on top of that. And then for all the other rares I just made sure to get as much life and resistance on them as I possibly could, just making sure my lightning resistance was higher or equal to other resistances because of the Wise Oak flask. And speaking of flasks, I used a life flask, and a Serious Promise, a Wise Oak, a diamond and then a Quicksilver flask. A silver flask for the onslaught could be a good option as well. For gems I used my Spark setup in my bow to take advantage of the +2 to Sacred Support Gems. And together with Spark I used Spell Echo, Controlled Destruction, added lightning damage, pierce and power charge on crit. I already mentioned that if you can get a corrupted quiver with pierce, then you can possibly use a hypothermia gem here instead for some more single target damage. In my chest I used my Vaal Stormcall setup, and with that I used Conk Effect, Controlled Destruction, Less Duration, Lightning Penetration and Elemental Focus. In my helm I kept my movement setup, which was Flame Dash, and with that I used faster casting and a level 7 Arcane Surge. I kept the Arcane Surge at level 7 to make sure it triggers every time I use Flame Dash. Then I also kept an Ice Golem in there, but it's not really something I use and I just left it there for no reason really. In my boots I kept my aura set up, and that was Herald of Thunder, Wrath and then an Enlighten to lower the reserved mana a bit more. Lastly I had a Portal Gem here, but actually a Decoy Totem could be a nice way to get bosses located where you want them for maximum spark damage. Then lastly in my gloves I kept my defensive setup, which was Immortal Call level 11, cancel damage taken level 9, increased duration and Vaal Righteous Fire. I put the Vaal Righteous Fire gem here to get the bonus from the increased duration gem as well. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the build and the video, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one.